right, hello all, and welcome to Lab 13, Food Webs and Cascades. This is due next week, which is the Monday before Thanksgiving, or for my other class, Saturday class, it's due the Wednesday after Thanksgiving. I'm trying to space out some of these a little bit so that you don't feel overwhelmed with a number of things that are due in the next few weeks. All right, so Lab 13. It is a hands-on activity, and also you'll have a video to watch, okay? So overall, something that we're going to be going over very briefly in class is about how organisms in an ecosystem are organized, okay? Usually organized based on their food levels, which is known as a trophic level. Trophic is basically who do they eat, okay? At the bottom is autotrophs. Autotrophs, auto means self, troph means eat. Basically, they can make their own food, okay? Using inorganic nutrients and outside energy, they're also known as producers, okay? Others are known as consumers. So they can take CO2, H2O, and sun energy to build complex molecules and oxygen. The oxygen is a byproduct and not the goal, okay? These are known as photoautotrophs. There are chemoautotrophs. We're not going to go into those right now, but photoautotrophs are things like the plants that we've been learning about in Lab 11, but also say in a bacteria, algae, protists, sulfur bacteria. All these things do photosynthesis and are photoautotrophs. The other kind of troph is a heterotroph. They must obtain preformed organic nutrients, okay? We are all heterotrophs. I can't make my own food. I obtain food from other things, okay? So I just had my breakfast, and it included a bagel with cream cheese. And a bagel has wheat and seeds, and the cheese is from a cow. I didn't make any of those. I obtain it from other organisms, a different source than me. That is hetero, okay? Heterotroph. They're also called consumers. We're going to talk about the layers of consumers as we get through this lab. Decomposers acquire nutrients by absorbing them from dead organic matter. Decomposers are heterotrophs as well, but decomposers, specifically, they only eat dead and dying things. They do not kill or harvest their own stuff. So when we're talking about trophic levels and food chains, as is the focus of this activity, primary consumers are consumers that eat producers, okay? These are herbivores. This caterpillar eats tomato plants. So this caterpillar eats tomato plants. This bunny eats lettuce and carrots and whatnot, okay? Herbivore. Secondary consumers are consumers that eat herbivores, okay? This snake eats mice and bunnies. And it's a carnivore. Omnivores are also part of the secondary consumers. They can eat, so if you eat a salad and you eat a cow, you are acting as an omnivore, in that you're eating secondary consumers and primary consumers. Oh, sorry, you are a secondary consumer and you're eating primary consumers and plants. So you're acting as both. Tertiary consumers are consumers that eat secondary consumers. So you are a secondary consumer when you eat something like a tuna. Tuna eats pretty high on the food chain. Tuna, shark, etc. Their consumers eat secondary consumers, okay? So this hawk would eat this snake. This can be shown in this triangle. So I'm going to explain why it's a triangle, but it does actually go. So there's this many plants. 1/10 of that is of that biomass would be herbivores. 1/10 of that biomass would be primary predators, and then 1/10 is secondary predators. Okay. So this is herbivores, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and on up. It does reduce in number. We're going to talk about why it reduces in number. At the base also is another kind of heterotroph, the decomposers. Okay, so the consumers are up here, producers are down here. So when we're talking, I showed you that triangle, and one of the keys here is that not everything is converted in the same way. Okay, there's this much solar energy coming in per year. It's a lot of solar energy. Plants, no matter how hard they try, are only able to get about 1% of that total solar energy and turn it into net primary productivity. Okay? They have to do some cellular respiration. They have to maintain their own bodies. They have to take the glucose that they made and break it down and eat it. Some of it is incorporated into their own bodies. That's the NPP. And a lot of it is lost to heat. You see already with just the sun and the plants absorbing the sun, half of what the plants absorb is lost to heat. This is a common theme, okay? So producers, again, they lose some respiration, and there's decomposition of wasted food. Basically, not every plant is eaten all the time, which obviously makes some sense. About 10% of its NPP is eaten by herbivores, okay? Is eaten by herbivores overall, and then a lot of that's lost to heat, a lot of that's lost to decomposition and weight. Only about 10% of those herbivores' biomass makes it to carnivores. And then of those carnivores, once the carnivores have eaten them, some of it's lost to heat, some of it's lost to decomposer biomass, and only 10% more of that makes it to the top carnivores, and so on and so forth. This explains why there's so few top predators in a certain group. There can't be enough plants ever to support the same number of carnivores and herbivores, as herbivores have a larger pile of mass energy in front of them, all of this producer energy. But the carnivores, they have, basically the food is filtered through the producers. So energy flows through an ecosystem. This is the energy here. Energy comes into the system via the sun and is absorbed via producers. These producers then give their chemical energy to the primary consumers. Note the direction of the arrow here. Primary consumers then incorporate some into their body, lose some as heat. Their energy, so this is, the arrows represent the unidirectional flow of energy from eaten to eater. Okay? You're never going to have a arrow pointing from the rabbit to the producer, because the rabbit itself is not giving anything to the producer. It's only taking. It's literally taking the chemical energy that was originally in the sun and converting it into its own energy. That conversion is obviously costly. We are exuding a lot of heat as we burn these calories, and that energy is lost. And so this bunny now has only incorporated maybe 10% of the plant's energy into it, and then this secondary consumer is only going to be able to incorporate about 10% of that into its body. Okay, similar with tertiary. Energy is being lost at every step, because whenever you convert energy, you lose some. Think of it this way: when you turn on a light, even one of those low energy lights, it gets warm. Because you're converting electric energy into light energy, any conversion of energy loses a little bit of energy. You're probably learning this in other science classes, or you've learned this before in basic physical science. Okay, so there's lost energy as this plant converts, and then when the rabbit eats it, the actual eating and converting into rabbit itself means there's lost energy. And lost energy when the rabbit is converted into snake, and lost energy when the snake is converted into the hawk. there is no energy cycle. The energy starts at the sun and it ends at the hawk. And some of it's recycled. Obviously, it's not destroyed, but eventually all the energy that was in the plant will be lost to heat. And very little of it will end up back in other plants. A food chain, which is what we're going to be focusing on, follows the flow of energy from one trophic level to the next. Okay, so we have the first trophic level is primary consumers, second trophic level, primary producers, second trophic level consumers, third trophic level secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Okay, we're usually going to go only about that much. There are quaternary consumers as well. Okay, remember it all starts from the energy from the sun. There's no cycle around here. The last of the energy goes to the decomposers, but there's no movement of energy from decomposers to here. Okay, there's no cycling. Okay, this shows the movement of the energy. Again, note these arrows are pointing from the grass to the thing eating the grass, from the snail to the bird, from the bird to the fox. The next piece is a food web. Okay, so food webs are multiple food chains showing the complexity and interaction of multiple things. Okay, so we're going to be in this creating multiple food chains and demonstrating the complexity of trophic levels. Okay, we're going to be demonstrating this via the video about the Gorgonosa savanna and talking about the interaction of organisms within that. Again, the directionality of the arrow, it points to the flow of the energy. Okay, this energy flows to rabbits and to snails. Okay, now obviously this is not everything, but this shows more complexity than a food chain does. And note that the higher on the food chain you are, the more arrows are pointing to you, and there's no arrows pointing from you to someone else. Those are the peak predators here. And of course, everything sends its final amount of energy to the decomposers. So this is the food web of a hypothetical forest community. So we are going to be looking at the forest community itself. And discussing a little bit, not the forest community, but the savanna community. And you guys are going to be creating these. You don't have to print anything to create them, but you do have to understand the relationships here and when you're drawing, you have to at least draw a food web and a food chain. When you're drawing them, understand what's the energy and directionality of moving, and also you have to understand how organisms relate to each other. Okay, and some organisms, so this organism is a tertiary consumer. But technically, if it's only eating hares, it would be a secondary consumer. But it's eating hares and chipmunks and red-winged blackbirds, which are secondary consumers, and so it is technically a tertiary, but depending on its diet, could be a secondary. Okay, so some things are in two levels here. The next thing we're going to talk about is cascades, and we will be discussing this as part of our community ecology. But something to note is that a trophic cascade is when one level of a ecosystem is impacted, and it impacts multiple levels. Okay? So Yellowstone introduced wolves back into this area. The wolves eat elk and mule deer and coyote. Okay? And what this means is that coyote were the previous top predators. With the introduction of wolves, you have decreased the mule deer, decreased the elk, and decreased the coyote. Coyotes themselves are interacting with mice and beavers and eating them. What that means is that now there's more mice and more beavers. So, and then so we have a plus, which means a minus, which means a plus, which means for the grasses and aspen, a minus. They actually are going down. And so we have this trophic cascade. Additionally, with the increase of mice, rough-legged hawk is doing better. So it's an interesting pattern here. We can see all these interactions. Additionally, the cottonwood and willow, which are eaten by the beaver, are not eaten as much by the elk and mule deer. So it depends. That means the aspen and cottonwood and willow might do a little bit better, but with the increase of the beaver, they are also doing a little bit worse, so maybe it's a wash for them, okay? So the idea is that if you remove the top predator or you add the top predator, what happens? Okay, so if you take away the top predator, when wolves were taken away, then the top herbivore was increasing and the producers were going down. Producers going down is bad for everyone, and eventually it will affect the herbivores as well, okay? Sea otters is one example of this. Sea otters eat urchins, urchins eat kelp. Well, when sea otters were hunted for their fur, the sea urchins start eating more kelp and completely destroy these kelp forests, and with it the ecosystem. So top predators are very important to the stability of a lot of these ecosystems because the prey has evolved to compensate for being eaten by a predator. Without the predators, they overpopulate and sometimes destroy entire ecosystems. Bottom-up cascades are different, okay? So we're going to be looking here at both bottom-up and top-down cascades as part of your disturbance cards as in the activity we're doing, okay? Bottom-up cascades generally happen when an environmental or human impact drastically increases or decreases plant growth. Something that might cause that would be a forest fire or or deforestation or some sort of event where the plants are impacted, maybe a drought, something that's not necessarily human impact. It's usually widespread. You kill off a bunch of plants. Everything above that isn't impacted. So nitrogen or nutrient deposition will increase or decrease plant growth. Nitrogen can increase plant growth, which causes everything above it to increase. Deforestation can decrease plant growth, which causes everything above it to decrease. Drought or high rainfall events, same thing. When producers die, though, so do other things above them. This is important for understanding the impacts of your disaster disturbance cards, okay? You're going to be describing them. So what are you impacting? Is it that all of the, say, a bunch of lions were poached? Then you're going to have that top-down cascade. Is it that all of the plant species are affected via a drought, via a other things? There's impacts on this and tells you what species they're impacting, and then you can discuss, well, how is it going to affect all the things in my food chain, in my food web? Okay. For instance, phytoplankton. Let's say a oil spill was to kill off the phytoplankton, and it goes down over time. Well, the zooplankton, it relies on that. And the forage fish rely on the zooplankton. And the predators rely on the forage fish. And basically, you destroy a whole ecosystem by destroying the plants. Because remember, they are the source of all the energy that's flowing through the entirety of the system. Cut off that, you cut off everything. All right, now let's move to the lab activities. There's a video below, and that is described in your actual lab, and I'm going to go to the lab in a few minutes, okay? The video is about 30 minutes long. You do have to take some time to watch it, and we'll assist you in understanding what's going on. Okay, it's going to give you context about the location you're learning about and the species within. Then you're going to fill out the PDF linked in the assignment page, okay? I'm going to pull up that PDF right now. I'm going to pull that. All right, so this is the PDF that you guys will be working with. Come back here. Might be over here. Okay. So So again, one thing I wanted to note for everyone, and I did make this note when I made this, there's an easily accessible teacher's guide. The teacher's guide is like, if students say this, they could say this. Please use your own words. Don't copy this. Don't copy this. Count your actual producers. Count your actual consumers, okay? Remember that the key here is that you learn this information and are able to answer questions that I have about it, okay? But if you are not answering about the producers and consumers on your own, then when I ask you a question about that on the lab exam, you won't know what I'm talking about because you didn't actually learn it, okay? Also, if you've done this before, found stuff in the teacher's guide and gotten marked down for it, you will get reported to academic services, which could potentially impact your grade in my class. Please do not. Okay. So we're going to talk about the food chain as a model that identifies feeding relationships. We have a producer and a consumer for your piles. Okay, so let me show you what the piles are going to look like. Okay, you have these organisms. You're going to print them out, and again, you can cut them and then fold it in half, and you can make piles. Making piles is easiest. You can also make lists. Okay, my suggestion would be is that if you do not have the ability to print these, again, you don't have to use the colors. The colors are nice, but you don't have to use them. If you're unable to print them, then what you need to do is actually write down information about each one of them. Elephant, herbivore, primary consumer, no predators, okay? And so this gives you some information about where they are and what they get eaten by, okay? Now, what do they eat? Leaves and fruits from trees and shrubs. And this will tell you what, if the grassland is impacted, they are not as impacted as, say, the buffalo would be, okay? So try to think about these interactions. You want to be able to have this information in front of you, which is why I recommend printing it out. If you're unable to print it out, write down the important information, especially where is their habitat and what are they eating and what eats them. The lions eat these guys, okay? We have the warthog. They have lions. Some of them are omnivores, okay? They eat multiple things. And so it goes through, it has lions, and it has impalas, and it has vultures, which are decomposers, okay? And next, we have tall grass. Some of them eat tall grass, some of them eat short grass. So this is one of the producers, okay? Serval, carnivore. You'll see it is at least a secondary, sometimes a tertiary consumer. Shrew, African fish eagle, okay, that's going to be one of the top predators. Okay, see, it has no predators, and it's eating a bunch of things, including baby alligators, which are already a secondary predator. Okay, we have the short grass, we have the small trees and shrubs, and we have then past that is these events. Remember, I said we're going to talk about cascades and impacts. Drought. During the dry months, plants, especially grasses, grow more slowly. So now we have this issue where there's no water. What organisms will it affect? Think about the fact that there is no water and these annual cycles of flood and drought. So if there's no water, it impacts the grass. If there's no grass, it impacts the buffalo. And if there's no buffalo, it impacts lions. Okay, so now we have a pattern that we can look at, that cascade. That's the bottom up. Agriculture and deforestation has a similar thing, but look at what it does, okay? Essential habitat for, look at which things it's impacting and see if that's part of your food chain, okay? War. War is an interesting one because it's not impacting as much of the ground. Instead, it's that soldiers and farmers have decimated the population of large animals. Okay, now we're taking away the primary herbivores, like an elephant. We're taking away the primary carnivores, like a lion, okay? Think about what that's going to do to everything downhill of it. That up-down pattern and how food webs will complicate that, okay? We have fires, increasing human population. What does that mean? And so it gives you some information about that. Tourism, etc. Okay, so now we have all this information. We have these impacts. What does it tell you to do? So you're going to select 4 cards and create a food chain starting with the producer. You're going to label the trophic level of each one. Remember, we start with the producers, okay? You need a primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. Remember, all of them need to be connected to each other. If you have your tertiary consumer be a lion, but then your secondary is nothing that a lion eats, that's not going to work. You need to have everything connected to each other, okay? All right. And then you have your ecological force, drought. The ecosystem impacts that are noted in the card. Write down in your own words what it says. Then the producer. Remember, if it's affecting the tertiary consumer or the secondary consumer, it might impact the producer, might improve the producer, or it might decrease it. Figure out which one it is, okay? And so you're also going to describe a possible benefit. So let's say that you have something like war. Well, war is removing a lot of large animals from the ecosystem. Actually, this might be good for some things that the large animals eat. So think about that, okay? All right. And then there's this energy flow in the rule of 10%. We talked about this. Producers have this energy, that biomass to eat. Primary consumers can only incorporate about 10% of that into their bodies. Secondary consumers can only incorporate 1% of that into their bodies, 0.1% for the tertiary consumers, okay? So then you answer the questions. Why is a pyramid effective model for quantifying energy flow? We talked about the rule of 10. And so now you have this many kilocalories. Well, how many kilocalories can be available to each group, okay? So producer level had 3,500 kilocalories of energy per area. That's the level that occurs at the bottom, okay? And then from there, how many is going to be up to each one? Think about what you would need to do that, okay? So track it up for your trophic level, okay? All right. And then next thing we're going to do is make a food web, okay? And I'm going to show you examples of the food web and the food chain. But you have to complicate it, okay? And you're going to choose a new different disturbance card, note 4 new ecosystems, and talk about all of these, but then think about how it affects your web structure. And does it break down different parts of the web, okay? All right, and then you evaluate the models, meaning things like for the food chain, list 2 things this model is useful for illustrating or predicting. It's illustrating the flow from one organism, from the producers to the top. Okay, energy pyramid is a way to describe things. Some of them, obviously the food web is capturing some complexity, but not the energy pyramid complexity, okay? And then this is up to you, but figure out which one you think represented the Gorongosa ecosystem best. All right. So you're going to print the organism habitat and disturbance from its cards if you can. You don't have to, but it does help you to organize it better, okay? If you cannot print, you're going to copy each down on a piece of paper, write out the animal name, what eats it, and then write down is it a primary consumer, a secondary consumer, etc. And this information is going to allow you to add it to a food chain. You don't have to have the cards printed out, but you do need to know that information. What is it? What does it eat? What eats it? And where does it live? When creating your food chain or web, you are either going to write it down on a piece of paper or you're going to put the cards out and connect one to another, okay? And remember that everything has to be connected in some way. You can make a food web and one thing can only be connected peripherally, but in a food chain, everything has to be connected to the other, okay? Remember the arrows should represent energy flow. Energy in rabbit goes to a serval. The serval does not give anything to the rabbit. Taking, okay? So this is an example food chain. I use these same pictures here, but Remember to use your own food chain. There's a lot of different food chains you can make. The lion does not only eat warthogs. So this is an example. In the short grass lives insects. Insects eat the short grass, so there is energy going from the short grass to the insects. The insects are then eaten by the warthog. The warthog eats more than insects, but we're just tracking what went into the insects and where it goes. So it goes into the warthog, and the warthog is then eaten by the lion. So there you go. You have this clear pattern of that. Producer, you're going to label them as producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. Remember that this is a simple pattern. Your food web should be more complex with more arrows pointing in more places, okay? And then most of your disturbance answers should be dependent on the specific food chain you choose. Note, do not choose the one that I just created, and also don't choose the one that they used as an example in the assignment. Try to choose your own. There's lots of directions you can go. I want you guys to work it out, though, on your own and figure out which ones are related to which. Cascades can impact all organisms negatively, or some get a positive and some get a negative. Do you think, remember the cascades that I talked about, how top-down cascades affect some organisms up, some organisms down, depending on the organism, okay? Think about what is causing. Bottom-up usually affects everything badly, okay? But is it a bottom-up or a top-down? Read the card closely. Food webs have multiple food sources for multiple organisms, okay? So you'll need a second type of plant. So if I was to go add it to my original food chain, I would take two types of plants, like long grass and short grass, okay? And then you're gonna add 4 more animals. You can add another predator. Well, then maybe you add something else that the predator eats. Well, then maybe you add something else that omnivore, like the warthog, eats, and so on and so forth. Try to pick ones that are all interacting together. Obviously, you can have one that's just peripherally eating the warthog, but it doesn't interact with anything else. That's okay too. Think about where they all live as well. And remember the direction of the arrows. All right, so this again is the concept of the food web. You're gonna have 2 types of plants at least at the bottom, and then arrows going to who eats what, and then arrows coming from these to the things that eat them above, and label where they are. Generally the ones, even if they eat from 2 different levels, they should be on the highest level that they can be, okay? All right, well that's all I have right now. And again, this is, so we'll take a little bit of time to watch and build, but once you understand the whole flow and pieces, what I want you to understand here is really how energy levels are impacted through the food webs, and how one organism can impact multiple others in a chain or a web, okay? And that's all I have. Again, pay attention to your calendars for when this is due. I have fixed all the due dates for that. All right, everyone have a great week.